Plane crashes are happening at an irregular pace during the Trump administration, and it's not normal and it's not usual. And what you do in response to that is not what the Trump administration has done, which is to continue to cut funding and personnel for things that matter in air safety and for American lives. And I have the great pleasure of welcoming a couple of experts in the legal world in aviation disasters from the Kreindler firm. We've got Justin Green and Aaron Applebaum, who are working with me on a case in particular. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But I thought at this moment, at this timely moment, when one of the families of dozens who have died since Donald Trump took office, one of the families has already filed their claim against the government under the Federal Tort Claims Act for an eye-popping $250 million. I want to talk about the procedure for these things, kind of get in a bit into the weeds and dive into an area almost like a TED Talk meets a law school class here on Legal AF. Get into an area that our audience may not be familiar with, which is what happens after the disaster and how do victims and their families seek justice. So welcome, Justin and Aaron. How are you?
Well, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Nice to be on.
And as we said, the Popok firm, which everybody knows now after the last month, is up and running, is one of the things that I decided to do with my life after the election and put my 35 years experience into obtaining justice for people who have had catastrophic injuries or had their lives turned upside down. In the area of aviation disasters, I can't think, there is no better firm, I believe, for me to partner with than the Kreindler firm and these two great partners here who have joined us. So Justin and Aaron, you guys can choose who's going to kind of jump in here first. Talk to our audience about what you're observing with your years of experience. Put what is going on right now in context before we get into some of the individual cases and procedures that need to be used to obtain justice for somebody.
Aaron, why don't you start off?
Sure. We are exiting a relatively golden age of commercial air travel in the United States. There had not been a major crash in the US since 2009, before the crash occurred over DCA recently. It actually is very unusual to have a period of such incredible safety. And we're entering now an era, as you mentioned, that is unprecedented, where we've seen multiple crashes from commercial airplanes, one right after the other. And that does not typically happen here in the United States. And we have to start asking ourselves why. General aviation accidents happen on a fairly regular basis. Before media attention really turned to air crashes, there was one happening almost every day, but not a lot of attention was paid to it. One-seater, two-seater planes were crashing, and that was fairly normal. But commercial airplanes falling out of the sky is unusual, and we need to look to the root of what is happening and why.
And everybody, before we turn to Justin, everybody got all excited, hot and bothered a few months ago about drones and UFOs and all sorts. Forget all of that. Air travel is one of the keys to our economy. Air travel is one of the keys to being an American, that you can freely travel with economical fares from one end of the country to the next. And now, for me, that's been destroyed. A client we're going to talk about, not particularly, but just in some, they told me today they won't get back on a plane because of what's happened. And I can't blame them. The question for our audience is going to be, as we get further into this hot take today, is going to be the call to action. Like, what do they do about it? What do we do about it as an American people? Justin, what do you think?
Well, statistically, aviation is still safer. There's an old trope that it's more dangerous to drive to the airport than to take the flight. However, to the families of the 67 that were killed on the American Eagle jet, that's not really reassuring. I mean, that accident should not have happened. The accident that Aaron is leading the prosecution for, the Delta accident up in Canada, that should never have happened. So it's not really about how safe aviation is. It's how do you eliminate these accidents before they happen? How do you take the risk out? In terms of collisions at or near airports, this has been something that's been blinking red for a long time. In fact, I have a column in the New York Law Journal on aviation that I ask my partners sometimes to author articles for. And a few months ago, when Kevin Mahoney, one of our partners, said, "What subject should I do?" I said, "Do collisions at the airport." And that article was published the day of the accident. So it's not something that we didn't think
Hours
about.
before.
It's not something we weren't, ringing the alarm bells on. But it's just infuriating that it still happened with such serious risk to the traveling public.
And an administration that seems to want to make political fodder out of the issue rather than make create a solution. I mean, just 2 weeks or so after Flight 5342 went down in the backyard of Donald Trump in the White House, that's when they decide to cut more people under Doge at the FAA and cut more funding. That doesn't seems to be a mismatch here between this administration and that. I got a question. Um, so we've had in the last 4 weeks with five major disasters, another 100 or so, like you said, things that are happening at airports and collisions at airports. When I started doing hot takes on this, people were saying, "There's another one, Popok. There's another one. There's another one." I guess let's walk through. What is the procedure for a lawyer to represent a family and or a victim in a case like this? Because it's complicated, and it's not just going down to your local state courthouse and filing a case. There's a complexity to it, especially when the government is involved, the FAA, or in this case the case of 5342, the Army, and all of that. Why don't you walk through that with it? And then I do want to spend some time talking about, Justin, and Aaron too, your unique backgrounds that brought you onto this podcast and into this field.
So let me start off with answering that question. First, a lot of people after plane crashes, they ask me, well, is it going to be a class action? And the answer is no, because each victim deserves their own lawyer. Their claims are very serious and very individual. And ultimately, each victim should have the right to hire their own lawyer. And most of the cases are handled on contingency fee basis. And what would happen typically is a lawsuit's filed, the cases are consolidated, and then under a complex litigation plan that the judge overseeing the case will address, a committee might be appointed. Right now, I'm proud to serve as the co-chair of the committee appointed by the judge in the Ethiopian Flight 302 Boeing MAX case, and Aaron is also on the plaintiff's executive committee. But what I'd like to do is address, let Aaron address why it's so important that each case be individually handled, because she does a lot of the work with the families on proving the damages that ultimately really drive the value of the cases.
Yeah, we just had, as a segue into Aaron, we just had the family in Chicago area file their claim, and we'll talk about the difference between a claim and a lawsuit in this context. With this $250 million number, father of four, 40 years old, three sons, and all of that. So let's talk about the role of the lawyer in shaping a positive outcome when it comes to this. If justice can ever be brought by money, and we all have our doubts about that, how does a lawyer go about doing that?
Look, it's impossible to place a value on a human life. And anybody who has ever lost somebody important to them knows that you are in your worst possible moments when you lose somebody, especially when it is sudden and traumatic and in a way that you don't expect. And it's really important to have an attorney who is familiar with this area of the law to help guide you through the process. And look, everybody on this plane is going to be eligible to receive compensation, and I'm discussing the DCA crash right now, but the airlines and the insurers and the government and the attorneys who are going to be making decisions on how much each family should be compensated, they have to look at dozens and dozens of people and somehow group them into categories. And what they'll usually do is, they'll have like a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, people who have no survivors, people who have, families, people who had dependents. They categorize people. But aside from that, you're nothing more than a seat number to them. It's very impersonal. I mean, you're just a name on a spreadsheet. And what we do as lawyers for these people is we kind of step into the shoes of the victim and we make them human beings again. we enforced to the attorneys and to the claims adjusters, this was not just a seat number, this was a person. He had a family, he had a background, he had hopes and dreams for the future that he will never live to see now. And we humanize them. And by doing that, we put them into context and we explain to the lawyers on the other side that these are not just people that you categorize. You have to look to the harm that you did in a real human context and make them whole again. And every single person who's bringing a claim on behalf of a lost loved one, they would give it all up in a second to have their loved ones back. I mean, this isn't about money for them, but the only way to really get recourse from big corporations and the US government is to hit them in the pocketbook. It's the only way to be made whole again. And while these people would rather have their family members back, the only way to do it is to do it financially. And in order to get your full, fair compensation for the loss of your loved one, you have to show the other side who they were as humans. And that's what we do.
As part of our disclosure, before we turn to Justin about process, the Popok firm, the Kreinler firm, Justin, Aaron, another partner there, we're working together for a victim and the family of a victim of Flight 5342. I don't want to mention names at this point out of privacy concerns of the family, but we joined together for this particular purpose. And while people come to me, I may get the call, but I got to bring in experts who eat, sleep, and drink this area of the law. I mean, when you guys get up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth and you put your head on the pillow at night, you're thinking about your families that you represent, your cases in this one particular area of the law. And that's why it's so important to go not just with any lawyer or law firm that you could find, but one that not only understands it in their fiber of their being, but commands the respect of, in this case, the government, the lawyers on the other side, the judges, the insurance companies, whoever is involved. When they see these names, they go, "Oh, all right, then we're gonna have to stop jerking around here." Why don't you talk though, Justin, about process? Like, somebody has in their life, they're either the surviving family or they know somebody that is or knows a victim. What's the process so we can manage some expectations here?
Well, usually what will happen is when someone dies, they'll have an estate. A lot of people have wills. Most people don't. But an estate will be opened, and the estate administrator would then have standing to either bring a lawsuit or, in this situation, initially file a notice of claim against the government. Here, right now, the big question is what happened? Why did this crash happen? Well, two main reasons. One is the helicopter pilots were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were at the wrong altitude. They're almost 100 feet too high, and they didn't stay clear of the American Eagle jet as they should have, and they undertook to do. And the second issue is air traffic control watched it all happen and didn't issue a safety alert and didn't give proper separation instructions. So the question is, how's the government liable? Well, under the law, the government has essentially said we are liable as a normal person under certain circumstances where we basically violate rules that we are required legally to follow. And here, the helicopter pilot being at the wrong altitude, helicopter pilot not staying clear, the air traffic control not doing what his job was, those are all violations that the government should be liable. But you can't just run out and sue the government. You actually have to file what's known as a notice of claim, and that's what has recently been filed. The notice of claim gives the government an opportunity to examine the claim and decide, whether they are going to accept the claim or negotiate a settlement before litigation. And you cannot sue the government until the government has either neglected or completely rejected the claim or neglected to respond to it for a period of 6 months. So there's not going to be, nobody can run out and file a lawsuit. Someone just ran out and filed a notice of claim, and the amount of money in the notice of claim is just a holding figure. It's just a maximum number that was thrown into the notice of claim. But it's going to be some time before litigation against the government moves forward. But we're looking at other manufacturers. We're looking at other defendants. We're considering claims against the airline. We're considering products liability claims. But you have to understand, it's still early days. The National Transportation Safety Board, who's investigating the accident, still has not come up with its preliminary report. That should be out within a week. And we will be moving forward with our claims shortly thereafter.
Justin, how's it possible to file a notice of claim if the investigation has not been completed yet?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is do our independent investigation. The National Transportation Safety Board does great work, but they take a very long time, and their findings are not admissible into evidence. So the Kreindler firm, we launched our own investigation shortly after the accident. We have, charted out the courses, looked at all of the relative communications, and we're pretty prepared to move forward with our claim um, once we have additional information from the preliminary report.
Great. So why don't we take the sort of the academic and the hypothetical, and why don't we kind of apply it to things that have just happened, including the 5342 flight that we're all working on together. And the most recent one is we woke up a couple of days ago to an upside down Delta flight, which that's not supposed to happen. And Aaron, you're very involved with that particular flight and that accident. I just watched Carolyn Levitt, our press secretary, take on Chuck Schumer because he shouldn't rush to judgment until we get to the bottom of what happened, and it was in Canada anyway. I'm like, well, I saw a guy that looked a lot like the president of the United States take to the podium and effectively blame diversity, equity, and inclusion for Flight 5342 going down. So I really don't understand why we can't make comments about the obvious. Talk about your role, that particular case, where we're at with that since it's in the news.
At the beginning when Trump made those comments, I really wanted to see the best in them. I wanted to try to spin them so that they were moderately okay from our president. And I think that what he was trying to say is that we need to have qualified air traffic controllers. And I can get on board with that. The other stuff, fine. But, the air traffic controller issue is a real one and needs to be talked about. So I agree with you that it's fine to talk about what happened right after. I mean, you don't have to wait for an investigation to conclude before you can comment on what happened. This is a completely different situation from the one that happened in Washington, though. In Washington, the pilots of the commercial flight were really not involved with the liability when the plane came crashing down. Here, the pilots were entirely in control of what happened. And without speculating too much, we've seen videos of what occurred, and their descent rate was so fast, and they did not flare the nose before they landed. And whomever landed that plane crashed it onto the runway like it was an aircraft carrier. And I got to tell you, this is not a situation like Miracle on the Hudson where the airplane failed and the heroic pilots saved all the passengers from certain death. This is the complete opposite, where the pilots pretty much did everything that they could to crash this plane. Not intentionally, of course, but and the design of the airplane is what, by the grace of God, saved all these passengers. The pilots had nothing to do with it. And while I certainly am not here to make moral judgments one way or the other, I am here to make liability judgments. And we're already representing passengers from this crash. It's a very complicated set of laws that governs what happened here because the plane took off in the United States and landed in Canada. So the liability is governed by a treaty called the Montreal Convention. This isn't your standard negligence case, like if the plane crashed on the way from Minneapolis to Seattle. It requires knowledge of a really niche area of law because the treaty has jurisdictional issues, damages limitations, potential forum nonconvenience arguments that the defense might make. So it's important if you're looking for an attorney to represent you in a case like this to find somebody who is well-versed in the treaty and knows what they're talking about when it comes to the nuances of the Montreal Convention.
Absolutely. I woke up that morning and I thought I was watching that Denzel Washington movie where he flew the plane upside down. I was like, what just that guy was drunk in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's truly a miracle nobody died. It's
Can I,
really a miracle.
can I just say it reminds me back in a number of years ago in 2009, there was a terrible accident up in Buffalo. It was a Continental Connection flight, and what we found out is the pilots were basically not competent to fly the airplane. And as Aaron just described, it was a perfectly good airplane crashed by pilots that weren't prepared to fly it safely. They found out the captain had failed 5 check rides. And I have a feeling that this accident in Canada is going to have similar findings that deal with pilot abilities. And one thing that I thought Aaron touched on is this is an accident happened in Canada, but it's a U.S. carrier, so U.S. is probably where the people will want to bring lawsuits.
Yeah, yeah. Notwithstanding what Carolyn Levitt said, it's not going to be on the other side of the border. And let's talk just at the end here at this hot take about what brings you to the Kreinler firm. How'd you get there? Why aviation cases? What about them attracted you? What's your special? Everybody has a special skill, right? Like Liam Neeson. What are your special skills that you bring? Let's start with Justin. About
My,
I know your background, and I'm learning about Aaron's as well. Go ahead, Justin.
my nowadays mines are much less lethal than Nielsen. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 19 years old, and I became a pilot. I flew attack helicopters. I have a commercial fixed wing license. Have a commercial helicopter license. I became the aviation safety officer of my squadron. I attended the Naval Postgraduate School to learn accident prevention, accident investigation. And when I got out after Desert Storm, where I served, I decided to go to law school. So I came here to law school in New York. Uh, it kind of made sense to do aviation law. During the summer, I worked as a law clerk at the Kreinler firm, where I'm now a partner. And I also worked at the leading aviation defense firms in New York City. And then I went to clerk for a federal judge. And at the end of the clerkship, I couldn't imagine going and spending the rest of my life questioning widows and widowers, and I'd rather represent them. So I came back to the Kreinler firm as an associate in 1997, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah, I think it's that special skill that you have that, when we were evaluating the case that we're all working on together for that family, to hear your background, hear the background of your other partner, Brian, who's actually flown in the airspace with that, and with those towers you guys have litigated against that particular FAA tower that we're dealing with in the case. It's just, there's no replacement for that. You can't read about it in the book. It's not, I mean, I'm not knocking other law firms that try to dabble, but this is not an area where you dabble. And I knew your firm well. People know that I worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. I was a global head of litigation after 9/11. But of course, we lived that tragedy every day in that organization. That's part of the ethos and culture there. And you represented families. Your firm represented families, including Cantor families related to 9/11. So you guys kind of get it. Aaron, talk to the audience, about your background.
My path was very different from Justin's. I do not have a background in aviation prior to law school. But after graduating, I knew I wanted to help people. And I began working with a solo practitioner who happened to specialize in aviation law. And it wasn't something I had ever considered before, but I fell in love with it. It is a really neat area of the law because it uses both sides of your brain. You have to figure out, why did the plane crash, and how do we stop it from happening again? And it's very technical, but at the same time, you're representing families. You're representing people who are going through incredibly difficult times, and some families who have lost loved ones. And I really have a passion for helping people and helping them seek justice. And in this career, you can do that. I can go to work every day and help make things better for people who need us. They need guidance. They're in the worst moments of their life, and they need people to walk them through it. We also advocate for aviation safety reform. I played a big role in the case against Boeing related to the 737 MAX crimes. I'm working with the criminal case right now. I am assisting the families in trying to bring change to Capitol Hill and through the Department of Justice. It is a really niche area of law that allows you to think, but also help at the same time. And it's a passion.
Yeah, and your job just got a lot harder with the new administration. Good luck to you on Capitol Hill these days. I'm hoping they take it seriously, but frankly, after every school shooting, I think they're going to take things seriously when it comes to gun control. We don't see that happening. So, well, hopefully this won't be swept under the rug, and serious reform will happen. In the meantime, there's families that need our help and that need our justice. That need the justice that lawyers like you and I can bring to the table. And I wanted to start bringing on to Legal AF people that practice the law, right? I talk a lot about the law and the intersection of law and politics, but I also wanted to bring on people, especially ones that I'm now working with, to talk to our audience about what their day is like, not just TV law, real law. and affecting real change. So I'm so honored to have you here, Justin and Aaron, and I look forward to working with you on behalf of the family of one of the victims on Flight 5342. Thanks for being on Legal AF. Can I have you back on again in the future?
Absolutely. Thanks
Yeah.
so much for having us.
Look forward to it. And until next time, you're on Legal AF. Take a minute, hit the free subscribe button, and you know where to follow everything related to law and politics. Really, one place only on the YouTube dial, Legal AF MTN. Until my next reporting, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.